be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Have you ever found yourself being angry at God? I'm seeing some yeses there. Oh, we've got to know. That's good. That's fine. I have. I'm wondering if you had any feelings of anger towards God about what's going on here at Pompton Valley Presbyterian Church right now. Do you have any sense of anger? I mean, if you're brave enough, might you share it with me? Because I have my own sense. Is there anybody that would share it?
Why is this happening?
Why is this happening? I feel the same thing. I feel angry about why this is happening. And I also feel angry about why would God call me to be a minister during this crisis in the Christian church? What is it? Why do I have to pastor at a really difficult time when not only Pompton Valley Presbyterian Church, but a lot of churches are losing members and people are fading away, and they're not fading away to other churches. They're fading away into society and soccer games and field hockey games and concerts that go on Saturday night that keep them up late, and so they are too tired to come to church on Sunday morning. I get angry at God about why am I, a person of deep faith, called to pastor to seemingly unfaithful people? It is really hard for me to deal with. Now, here's the trick. Have you ever tried talking to God about your anger?
Yeah.
Good girl. So have I. I have ranted and raved at God about my anger. And I would encourage all of you to do the same. You see, this is what Habakkuk is all about. What Don read to us is the prophet Habakkuk ranting and raving at God about why is this happening to us here and now. You know, the prophets of old, the prophets of the Old Testament, 9 times out of 10, were angry at the people. They ranted and raved at the people about why you aren't doing, or why I'm not doing, why you aren't doing what you're supposed to be doing because of your faith in God. Habakkuk is the one prophet that turns that around and rants and raves at God about the injustices against God's people. Habakkuk wrote at a time that was right before the Babylonian conquest of Judah. Habakkuk sees the impending doom. He can perceive what is going to happen. He rants and raves about the injustice of the powerfulness of these idol worshipers and how they're going to be able to come in and take over God's faithful people, the Jews. You know, and back then, the prophets used it a lot as God's judgment. And like I said last week, we know a lot better now. We know that it's not God's judgment against us. But we do wonder at the injustices that seem to happen in light of an all-powerful God. So why? Why does it happen? Why is God allowing this at this time and in this place? It's basically the question of, why do bad things happen to good people? Now, forgive me if you've heard me tell this story before. You all know that it was about a year ago now that my daughter-in-law's mother became gravely ill with breast cancer. My daughter-in-law just lost her father, and her mother's breast cancer became much worse. And between about Hurricane Sandy and February, when Lanny Armstrong died, Lanny was just one constant rage about why is God doing this to us. She said it over and over and over again. And the part of me that wanted to protect God, which isn't that a crazy notion, why would I need to protect God, would say to Lanny, oh, don't rage at God. God is here to care for you and love you. And then somewhere, by the grace of God, about January, I decided to just go and sit with Lanny and let her rant and rave all she needed to. And I went over there one day, and she just raged at God. And I said, I get it. I understand. I do understand, because there's a lot to be angry about. And then Lanny died, and I was asked to officiate at the funeral. And in my processing with God about what would be the faithful thing to say at that time, I began to realize the beauty of Lanny's rage. Because Lanny really believed in God. She believed in God enough to be able to give her rage and her anger to God. I began to understand that God likes the passion of our rage and our anger. God likes knowing that we care enough to say, this isn't right. What's going on isn't right. We should not be having to do this. And I think that very much about Pompton Valley Presbyterian Church. I think that there is a goodness to us saying, this isn't right. What's happening to us isn't right. This last couple of weeks I've been going through the old session records, and I went all the way back to February 1958 and read what was in the session records about the birth of this congregation. And I feel the joy and the intentionality and the passion about the vision of Pompton Valley Presbyterian Church being a Presbyterian presence in Pompton Plains. And I read the minutes, and every month there's a whole list of new members, of people joining the church, and that was contagious to read that and to see how very interesting that was. And so I began to think about, okay, why did God feel so present back then at the beginning? And is God present now at an ending that can lead to a new beginning? And I began to wonder, is God really absent? Or is God truly, truly present with us now in a way that is far deeper, maybe, and more authentic than what was going on back then? And then I began to think about Habakkuk, and what Habakkuk said in the second passage was that he was stationing himself at the doorway, waiting to hear from God, that he was expecting what God was going to say and do next, and that he was expecting for God to give a vision. And in verse 3 of the second chapter of Habakkuk, it says, "For there is still a vision for this appointed time." And I began to feel myself as stationed at the door, understanding that phrase, for there is still a vision for this appointed time. I believe that. I believe that in the very depth of my being, that there is still a vision for this time. And I'm just going to stand right here at this doorway and expect for what God is doing in this time and this place. That is my prophetic call, is to have the hope and the trust and the faith, even if you can't. Now, I truly believe that the process called New Beginnings, which the presbytery is inviting this congregation to be a part of, just may well be the point at which you all can catch a sense of this vision of what God has for you. And I would highly recommend that you decide to join the process. I know that it has to be your decision, not mine. It has to be your process, not mine. So I'm, basically uninvested in the New Beginnings process. I'm invested in what God is doing through you. But I'd encourage you to think, maybe the New Beginnings process is what you need to do in order to hook into that vision. I don't know. Now, there's also something very interesting about Habakkuk and what he says about this new vision. In Scripture, and let me find it here so I can quote it exactly right. What Don read, Habakkuk said that there is still a vision for the appointed time, and it speaks, and that the Lord will answer and will write the vision and make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it, he said, so that a runner may read it. And I get this image of people, you know, in the New York City Marathon, which is today, and they're running along, and here's somebody holding a sign, and the words have to be pretty big so that the reader can see them, keep reading them, pass by them, and get the message. And that's what people say that means. But you know, it's interesting that one of the commentaries I read this week said that the person who that when we translate that Hebrew, we've gotten the words backwards. And he thinks that what it really says is that, so whoever reads it might run. Just stop and think about that. Whoever reads the vision might run. You know, God's vision may be so scary that we want to run from it. God's vision for our church, for the changes, for, you know, what needs to happen around here. Look at the people who have run because the vision includes change. I think we have to be aware that the vision could very well be scary. As a matter of fact, I'm probably 98% sure it will be scary to all of us because it's going to take us to a place that we don't necessarily want to go. But I've done that before, and it's worked out okay. And I'm encouraging you to do that now because I have faith and trust and hope that it does work out okay. Now, what supports that is thinking about how the vision that Habakkuk hoped for really did exist, and it happened. I mean, fast forward 600 years from when Habakkuk heard God saying that I still have a vision in mind. 600 years, fast forwarded from that, was the time when Thessalonians was written. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are the first words written in the New Testament. Most people are kind of shocked about that. We all think that the Gospels were the first things that were written down about Jesus Christ. No, it was 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. The letters of Paul were written before the Gospels. And so this vision that God had in mind in Habakkuk's time was the incarnation of the love of God that happened in Jesus. And you and I are the continuation of the incarnation of that same love of God. It is a high calling. It is hard in this day and age when there's so many distractions and so many things that hold us back. So go ahead, be angry, rant and rave. And in your passion of believing that God is there listening to your anger, hold on to your faith that tells you to have hope, that God still has a vision, that God hopes for Pompton Valley Presbyterian Church. Now, last week I ended my sermon by reading to you from Richard Rohr, and I'm going to do that again. It just seems that Richard Rohr and the daily meditations that he's sending to me have, well, to a lot of people, not just me, but they have a lot to do with what's going on here at Pompton Valley right now. And he says this: without the sign of Jonah, the pattern of new life only through death in the belly of the whale, Christianity remains largely an impotent ideology, another way to win instead of the transformative pain of faith. We need to go to that dark place, is what he's saying. We need to go to the belly of the well. We need to be angry. He goes on to say, or it becomes a language of ascent into, instead of the treacherous journey of descent that characterizes Jonah, Jeremiah, Job, John the Baptist, Jesus, Habakkuk. After Jesus, Christians use the metaphor, the way of the cross. Unfortunately, it became what Jesus did to save us, or a negative theology of atonement, instead of the necessary pattern that is redemption for all of us. Yes, love is always the final goal, but faith seems to be the way we get there. It is the only way to keep your mind, heart, and body open when it wants to close down. Faith is thus an end in itself. Faith is not what we do in order to get to heaven. Faith is not belonging to a group of believing a set of intellectual truths. Mutual perfect faith would be a bit of heaven now. To have faith is already to have come alive. Now, I don't want to just ignore the title of the sermon, which is Foxhole Spirituality. If you're paying attention, you're wondering where that name came from. That name comes from a Marine chaplain who preached a sermon to soldiers in the field in 1942. And what he said was that there are no atheists in the foxholes. That in the passions and the desperate times of lives, when those soldiers were going out to put their lives on the line in the foxholes, in the trenches of that terrible, horrible war known as World War II, there were no atheists. They believed in God. They believed that God was right there with them in the trenches, and that's what gave them faith, hope, trust, love, courage. So, my friends, may we all have a foxhole spirituality, a spirituality that keeps us trusting that God's presence is with us, even in this most difficult time. And let all God's people say, Amen. And now let us take a moment of silent meditation to think about what we've heard and how that connects to our lives.